Hi, so in this video, we're going to discuss a misleading error message. So to bring us to the point of getting this error message, we're in a Power Apps Canvas app. I want to connect to an Azure SQL database, more specifically a data warehouse instance, which effectively is still shows up as a database within an Azure SQL Server. I'm going to choose one of our existing connections. If you didn't have one, you would click Add Connection. And in this instance, we're talking about using the Azure AD integrated authentication. And here I'm going to just enter, I suppose, what you would effectively call the host name. And then I'm going to specify the database name, which is correct. So we've got Power Platform Philips, and I'm going to click Connect. Now, a telltale sign that it's not liking the details or it's ultimately going to give you an error message is the fact that this loading is taking a long time. So just while we're waiting for that to error, although it will give us another error because this instance is currently paused. So I'm just going to resume it just for the sake of this video. Shouldn't take too long. Just while we're waiting for that to error, another gotcha with making these connections is that when you set up your beautiful Azure SQL Server, you kind of don't want it to be opened up to anyone and everyone. So there's the concept of firewall rule exceptions, and that's at the SQL Server level. So if we get to the SQL Server level, and on the left under security and networking, you can either add in explicit rules, so start IP and end IP being the same, or you could add in a range. It even gives you this handy option now where it'll detect your current IPv4 address, although that won't necessarily be beneficial unless you've got a static IP, as that's likely to change. So that's essentially your public IP. So if you went like what's my IP.org kind of thing. But there is this handy option. I'm not saying it's suitable in all cases, but you've got this allow Azure services and resources to access this service, which is going to save us from having to add in exception when Power Automate tries to connect to it and whatever IP address that's coming from, or Power Apps tries to connect to it. But the more security minded in us may want to explicitly define exceptions, but just know that that can be a handy option that allows you to kind of go, I'm just going to work with this within my Microsoft ecosystem. And then obviously above and beyond the firewall rule exceptions, you've still got the security based on the authentication mechanism, as in that is still an extra layer, but you don't want to permit a connection at all unless it's from a valid source that you're happy with. So we successfully resumed this. Like I say, I'm just going to pause the video for a moment because again, a telltale sign is when this isn't going to work, it does take a long time. Okay, so here's the error message now that it's finally got to this point. So the tables didn't load correctly. That's relatively generic, but then in the more specific error details, you get this access is denied. So for me, this is misleading because you would be forgiven for thinking, well, I've connected to it successfully, but we're just dealing with an access issue, and then you could go down that rabbit hole. But in this instance, it's actually quite simple, the resolution, and all it is because we specified essentially like the host name of the server, we need to do more the fully qualified style. So whereas before we did Power Platform Philips, we just need to end .database .windows.net, and that's quite a standard thing for any of the Azure SQL database type stuff. So name .database.windows.net with obviously what the value you specify being the unique way of identifying your database amongst the many in the Azure service. Database name again will need to be valid. So I'm just going to click connect. And what you should find here is that it's so much quicker when it's worked. So in this very simple database, I've essentially got one table and a view of that table, and both of them show. And just because I can, if we add in the data table, for example, although this is where I find out I didn't even click on the table. So if I just very quickly do what we did previously, platform phillips.database.windows.net, and add in both of these, click connect, they'll now show up as data sources within this app, and I can select them, still nothing, but then I choose the fields and I can pull data through. So that's all working. That's what we desire. Just another call out. I didn't know this until I started looking into this issue, but there is specifically an Azure SQL Data Warehouse connector, and that isn't actually supported for use from within Power Apps, but it is supported for use from within Power Automate and Logic apps. So you can still use that connector if you couple it with Power Automate doing some of the heavy lifting and then bringing back data into the app. I then took that to mean at one point, well, you can't connect to an Azure SQL data warehouse database, but because it is essentially still a SQL database, as you've seen here, I have still connected to it using the SQL connector. I'm not sure what it's going to be like if you try and write back to it. However, in this example, we were only wanting to consume anyway, which probably is more along the lines of data warehouse. Just while we're talking about data warehouses, it is built more for like larger data sets and like mass batch querying. However, that doesn't necessarily mean it's expecting lots of users to be making those queries. So in that instance, probably an Azure SQL database would be better suited for transactional style interactions and many users basically writing and reading from a database. Just last point is if you want to go in and confirm the details that you need to enter, just go into the overview section of your Azure SQL database, confirm the server name and use the whole name in all of its glory. If you want to see other examples, just click on the show connection strings. Another little tip, if you connect to this Azure SQL Server /database by way of SQL Server Management Studio, it will not only connect, but it will allow you, if you've got an account with sufficient rights, to also make any firewall rule exceptions in one fell swoop. However, that will be your client firewall rule exception and not necessarily the exception you need from a service such as Power Apps. However, if you do face that firewall issue, the error message is normally very helpful in not only telling you the exception that you need to add, but that it is a firewall rule exception that you need to add. Okay, that concludes this video. Thank you for watching.